something around how people come to coach training.
Yeah, so this was coming out of us talking about our experience of getting to mentor people on coach trainings or engage with others that are at varying stages of coach training, and noticing how it's in itself, it's a really great experience of meeting each person where they're at, which is ultimately one of the keys of coaching.
What I remember from our last discussion are some thoughts I had about how people come to coach training and what I call social conditioning. Well, not what I call it, but what I imagine social conditioning to be. God, imagine I'd coined that phrase. It'd be very well known.
That dude's name again?
Got a weird surname. So what I believe is people's social conditioning in how they respond in conversations where one person's experiencing a difficulty, which I think is one way that people come to coaching. Certainly been my experience that people come to coaching because they're experiencing a difficulty, not because they want to necessarily achieve something. It's usually based on a problem rather than I want to grow my business and I've encountered no difficulties and I just want some motivation along the way. I mean, I've heard that posed theoretically, never experienced it. But often people in social situations start providing answers and doing the thinking for the person who's experiencing the difficulty, and that's to me been the major paradigmatic challenge to coach training, is unlearning that, learning a different way of engaging. So that was my takeaway from our first discussion.
Yeah. And I was at that time I was talking about these two new phrases that I'd seen on an interview from, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this dude's surname right now. I didn't have to write this down. It's John Viveki. So he's a Canadian professor. I'm not sure what professor of what exactly.
Is he, eh?
Sure what he's about. He's from Toronto, I think. The hour that I got to see him speaking, he sounds exceptionally engaging. He was exceptionally engaging, and look forward to watching more of his stuff. Anyway, the two terms that he brought up was this philosophia versus philonokia. So philosophia apparently is the love of wisdom, when philonokia is the love of victory. And he was talking about it in a sort of a dialogic context of how people engage in conversation. So are they engaging in conversation to experience wisdom and grow wisdom, or are they engaging in conversation to win?
So how do you relate that back to how coaches come to, or how people come to coach training?
So how you captured about that social conditioning. There's a role that somebody's playing, so they're trying to. If we talk about the drama triangle, they're more than likely inhabiting a rescuer role, and a rescuer has does more than half the work, has more power, seemingly has more power in that moment over somebody who's then a victim that the rescue is trying to help. And so there's something about having power being, and that's power over or something like that, which is
false
around
okayness.
That's interesting. I think, let me just say what I'm bumbling to try and get out is
yeah, spit it out, man.
I know. I think what I'm struggling with is the Nokia part, which is the victory. So it's somebody who's trying to help may not overtly have this agenda that I'm going to win, but it's I'm going to help you. And the end result is I helped. So I was victorious in helping you.
Yeah, can I share what came up for me?
Sure, please do.
So I mentioned okayness because that's often people are battling for a position of okayness, and it's a false okayness when they're on the drama triangle. So if I take more than 50, I can only be okay, or I can only feel okay if I'm seen to rescue you, or if I remain the victim, or if I make you the victim as the persecutor.
Yeah.
And so it's a victory in a contaminated sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is when somebody is stuck in that kind of dynamic, it's contradictory to a coaching role.
That's interesting. Okay, because there's also an overlap there, or not, maybe an overlap is not the right word. Similarity in roles on the drama triangle, roles on the winner's triangle, and role of coach.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not quite sure why role came out of my mouth. It felt at the moment, it felt like it was a good distinction to make. Maybe creating some kind of distance of some sort.
So should we continue to work with that, or was it not helpful?
Yeah, let's play.
Well, my thinking after what you said was that coach training then can be, or can involve, helping people transition from an unhelpful role, an unhelpful psychological role, to a helpful psychological role.
Yeah.
And I also I want you to clarify that whilst I believe that taking a position on the drama triangle happens so much in people's lives that it's one of the most powerful TA models to become aware of. I think there might be occasions where people are giving advice not because they are necessarily on the drama triangle. So they're not battling for a position of okayness or being better than the other and feeling okay because of that through giving advice. But maybe it's through just lack of contracting. So I think what mostly happens in social conversations when one person has a problem is the other person provides solutions. And I just have a sense that that's not always described by being in the drama triangle. Sometimes it's benevolent people or well-intentioned people just not doing contracting.
I'm imagining a spectrum, as I often do, around trying to make sense of things. And if the roles are, the one extreme is that you are on a drama triangle role, and the other end is not, so maybe a winner's triangle role, and somewhere in between there's a, I'm wondering if somewhere in between there is a clear distinction that this is the tipping, this is the Rubicon, this side is rescuing, this side is being resourceful, or if potentially there is a gray area where there's, to use a word I'm not sure is around this benevolence, and maybe it's more about how the other person then takes their benevolence, whether it decides if they move into a drama triangle or not.
Yeah, I like what you said, and that last bit resonates with some of my own thinking, that things don't necessarily start off in the drama triangle, but they might evolve onto it. Or develop onto it.
You know, there's that, is it, if you remember, please say the name, but somebody proposed that, was it all games start with 10% of a good intention?
I think Eric Burns said that.
Was it Burn?
And but if I'm wrong, we'll edit that bit out. And if I'm right, we'll edit that bit out.
I'm going to say we can just do some dubbing over, so your lips will be saying Eric Bird and the audio will say something else.
Big flappy lips, like those false lips.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe the meta perspective is people can come to coach training with different reasons for not engaging in the most helpful way with other people who have a challenge. And there's a shift that happens during the training that helps them not only fulfill a more helpful role, but go through some steps that lead to fulfilling that role. And what I'm thinking of there is contracting. So that's basically our 15-minute coaching course. You can pay for it on PayPal. That's how you become a coach.
We'll send you a sticker, a digital sticker.
Yeah, you can find us on Udemy.
It really does seem like time and time again that contracting is the key, or the missing key, when things aren't going so well.
Well, I think what contracting does is it gets people thinking and explicitly voicing their expectations, which opens up negotiation. And it's a co-creative process. And it helps to bring what exists on the psychological or the unconscious or the implicit level out into a visible level.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when that happens, the roles are properly designed and agreed upon. Provides a kind of a framework from which each person can operate. And how?
Oh. What as that process, contracting process evolves, the roles are then defined. That they don't automatically become defined.
I'm curious about that last bit. How would that work out automatically?
Yeah, so I'm saying it doesn't automatically happen.
Got you. What would automatically happen be?
My brain's stagnating. So the example that comes to mind is in some of the archetypal questions, or in a coaching session, is, so what's the topic, what's your outcome, what's my role in the conversation today, or what do you want from me today in this conversation? So it's that it is also part of the contracting, not just saying this is my topic and this is what this is my topic and this is what I want to walk away with, and that's contracting done. It's also the nuances of how do you want me to show up, what might get in our way today.
So it's interesting that I got hooked up on that word automatically. So there are two interpretations I have of that. The one is an automatic unconscious process where people default to their unconscious roles, and that would happen without contracting. And I think that it even can tend to happen when contracting is happening, but it's through the contracting process that those tendencies will be recognized and brought back onto track.
Yeah.
I think there's also the other interpretation is that the contracting process automatically leads to a different paradigm. And I got hooked up on it because I had two different potential interpretations.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. I think that my hunch is that we're probably talking about the same thing. And we're, like you said, just clarifying the language around it.
Now that's interesting because the same thing happens in contracting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was something happening outside of your awareness in me, and I voiced that, and then we could get on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and this links back to what you said earlier about that it's a co-creative process. So I didn't know that something was happening inside your head until you named it.
Yeah. And when I do, then you can clarify what your own thinking is with me. And maybe even you come from a different philosophical background, and that's where these understandings and interpretations would be named, maybe understood, and they might just form a foundation that people can only understand later.
Mm. Mm. Do you have a practical example?
Yeah, so working in an appreciative way means something that would be distinct from working in a problem-focused way. And I would say that can fall within the realm of coaching philosophy. So naming that one works in an appreciative way is something that, and maybe embellishing that a little bit with the client would help them understand that you do that. But if the client has a default problem-solving style of focusing on the problem, that's going to come. It is going to come up in the coaching. It's going to come up in how they think, what they think, the language they use.
Yeah, yeah.
And having agreed consciously to enter into a coaching relationship in which the practitioner works appreciatively is like it just sets a foundation. And so if frustration comes up when the coach is asking appreciatively generated questions and that's not resonating with where the client wants to go, we can look back at the contract. And I mean, I'm painting a very simplistic black and white picture of it now, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. But I think one wonderful thing that can emerge when that happens is the client can take a meta perspective on what's happening in the conversation and say, okay, I see that I'm focused on the problems, and that in itself is causing the anxiety, and that's causing the problem to actually practically manifest.
Yeah.
Experiment with something else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm really happy I asked you about a practical example, because I think that really gives it some really valuable color. And I say with quite a few coaches that I've mentored that are getting to the end of their coach training, and then they're starting to think about, how do I engage with people that aren't trained as coaches? So, most coach training will have peer-to-peer coaching, so that you're already starting to practice, but you get into a bit of a rhythm there. So you can't help but not know the process that coach is trying to demonstrate. So there's often some anxiety when going to coach somebody that's not trained or outside of the cohort. And talking about that initial contact session, whatever you might call it, and how important it is to be able to name certain things that are valuable to put on the table so that if you need to later, you can pick them up without them being a surprise with that client. And in particular, it's about what comes up regularly is if you're working with somebody and there's a potential need to refer to another helping profession, something like therapy, when you name it up front, that things might just get stirred up. And if we notice that if either one of us notice that something is getting in the way and maybe therapy is a valuable step, we'll stop and have a conversation about how you want to move forward so that it's not, somebody doesn't feel caught out later. So similarly, what you were saying about when the coach shares the philosophy of the appreciative thing, if they want to then point out to their client, I notice that you keep taking the problem-based approach. It's not an attack on them. It's far more likely to be seen as that invite into a meta perspective.
It might even highlight a game that the client invites people into in their lives that they're inviting the coach into. Like, I'm going to focus on the problem, you generate the solutions. I can imagine that as one way that might unfold.
Yeah.
So it's not just a problem-solving style, but it's a way of engaging in relationships.
So bringing this back to people that are coming into coach training, this is just, I suppose you and I talking about this, we're kind of each taking turns to preach to the choir about this. But time and time again, I just so my own experience.
I don't necessarily think so. Because from conversations that I have with people in the helping profession, I know that there are veteran practitioners who do the same thing, give advice.
So when I said preach to the choir, I saw us taking turns. So like when I'm preaching to you as a choir, and when you speak, you're preaching to me as a choir, as the choir.
A one-person choir.
Yeah. Well, when you got it, you got it.
These are multiple personalities in the choir.
Yeah. And we harmonize really well. But, okay, so what I was going to say is that's
except for Jimmy, whose voice hasn't broken yet.
Yeah, well, one day we're hopeful. From my own experience, having the opportunity to work with people in coach training, and also getting to supervise coaches, and then also noticing on my own practice how I get caught up in dynamics. So often it comes back to it's a relearning of something that I already know about myself, or what's a more useful way to show up as a practitioner, or a deepening of that learning. So this kind of work, making that the distinction of how do I show up in the helpful role, it's not an on-off switch, it's an ongoing process.
And it's not about once you've done your training that you'll never go back into that other role. But it's about learning. It's about learning the how to of helpful roles, and also being able to distinguish between unhelpful and helpful roles, so that when one invariably gets hooked into an unhelpful role, either through one's own stuff or through an invitation into a dynamic by a client, or an organization, then you can recognize that and recontract with the intention of getting back into healthier roles for each party.
Yeah. And I think you may have said something about this already, but with deepening your awareness, those moments can be great opportunities to take the work into an even deeper level. Because potentially the limiting belief is playing out in the here and now.
Yes. Yeah. And it's an aha moment. It's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you want to do about that?
Yeah.
What's the original contract? What is the original outcome you were looking for? Is that still relevant? How's what we've just seen happening relevant to the outcome you wanted and the one that you now want, if it's not the same thing?
Yeah. It really takes the work into a far more nuanced place.
Yeah.
Like sometimes being in the basement and realizing, oh, hang on, there's another level to the basement.
Mm.
There's a wine cellar below here.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're walking on the floorboards and suddenly they give way. Then you realize, oh, okay, there's actually a basement here. What's in it? And that's part of the process. I think that's why often coaches come to supervision, because they weren't expecting that to happen. There's almost an expectation that shouldn't happen. And when it does, it's, oh, shit. But that is part of the coaching process, and it's about being able to see those moments as okay. It's almost like going into the house and then walking around, not stomping, but where the creaks in the floorboards, and it's okay when we fall through or foot falls through.
And it's also okay for a floor that was sound to become creaky. I think that often it's also, to use that metaphor, if you spend so much time in the house and you're not seeing anything wrong, that might, this is focusing on problems, but not noticing things changing, maybe. You don't notice change, then maybe that's an indication to have a closer look.
Say more on that.
I think I'm trying to make the metaphor work very hard. I think what I'm trying to say is that many people come out of coach training, think, now I've got it. I won't have to do any more sharpening of this saw anymore. And that's incorrect. I think that's unsafe, both for you and your potential clients. Don't just wait for your leg to fall through the floorboards to go and find a supervisor.
Yeah, so it's not just somewhere you run to when things aren't going as expected. It's an ongoing process. Yeah, so I know I introduced the supervision a bit earlier. We seem to have gone there from coach training, but I think it's related because there's a paradigm shift experienced doing coach training, and there's a paradigm shift experienced doing supervision as well, which is, I'm sure there's going to be flack around this, but a continuation of coach training. Well, there's continuing professional development, so it's probably okay to say that.
Yeah. And you reminded me of the conversation that we had with Jo Searle, and in her introduction, she was saying in her own experience that coach supervision was the best coach training that she could have had, as in her being in supervision. This was before she even became a supervisor herself.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's making me think of something we talked about last week, knowing how to play, or knowing what a game is, like tennis, compared to knowing how to play it. Yeah, there's like a deepening and an immersion when you're actually on the court.
Yeah. 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 And so, yeah, so often people come, obviously there's theory in coach training. So theoretically, people can know very clearly what coaching is. But when you get into the seat and you realize, hang on, it's not playing out how I thought it should be or how I was taught it should be. What do I do now? Or is it okay for me to do what I'm doing? Because this is what it feels like is the natural way to play the game, to play tennis.
Yeah, when the conversations start happening outside of the bounds of what you were taught.
Yeah. What then?
And that's also a co-creative process. It's not about being given the answer, but it's about unpacking everything around that conversation happening outside of the bounds. Like, what are the moves of that happening? How did you as the practitioner get pulled into playing a role there? How can you recognize that using a reference framework to understand it so that you can apply it elsewhere in practice, and then generating some options for what you could do instead?
Yeah. Yeah. Remember, so my sporting background is swimming, and my swimming coach would often bring out her video camera and video us what swimming, and then we would come out and then we'd watch it together, and she would say, so what do you see happening now? Okay, this is what I'm seeing now. So when I'm saying put your hand in the water like this and you think you're doing it, look what you're actually doing. So that was
so it's a meta perspective.
Completely.
Yeah, so you may have been doing things differently to how you thought you were doing them, and it gives you a different perspective.
Yeah. And there's no, I mean, it was always such a great teaching moment, because there was no potential for a fight or a competition or I'm right, you're wrong kind of stuff. It was, I can see I'm overreaching with that hand now.
Yeah, it's not someone saying, look what you're doing. It's saying, here's the video. What do you see yourself doing?
Yeah. Where are we now?
Well, that's our supervision course wrapped up in 15 minutes, and you can also find that on Udemy.
Yep.
Is that a wrap?
I think we're there. Wherever there is.
Cool. Like, Give me a hand, Andrew. Your hand, not a hand. Subscribe.
What do you want? What do you want me to
Comment. Reach your hand through the screen.
do? Which side am I?
Like on the left. It's falling apart.
Oh,
We
dear.
better
Sorry.
wrap
Be better next time, I promise.
up. Yeah, I'll make a note.
Okay.
That was an 8. We can get you to a 9.